Good morning. I'll begin with an apology for those of you who came today expecting to see our guest speaker, Frank Mundo, who was scheduled to be here today, but then was unable to fulfill that commitment. And as you already know, our settled minister, Reverend Andy Burnett, is out of town this weekend, and I'm quite proud to say that he's attending a Unitarian Universalist Association Board of Trustees meeting, of which he is a member. And so I volunteered to present today's message in their absence. As most of you know, I'm a Valley Unitarian Universalist Worship Associate, and I'm honored to present a message today. The title of my sermon is Reason, Racism, and Reaction, Learning to Focus on What We Can Do. This month, our theme is reason, and we've been exploring it from different perspectives. And while I'm not a philosopher, it's my intent to share my thoughts with you about reason and racism and what that might mean from my Unitarian Universalist perspective. For those of you who know me and have heard me speak from this pulpit in the past, this topic is a continuation of what I've said before and what I believe, which to summarize goes something like this. I believe this country is deeply divided along race lines. Well, of course, other divisions also exist, but the racial divide is particularly evident and entrenched. This divide causes different life experience among race groups. Further, I believe that there is a pernicious denial of this division that causes it to continue. The facts and evidence of the division change over the course of time, but really, the denial seems to stay the same. My point today is a simple one. Let's suspend our disbelief and move beyond arguing about divisive labels and instead focus on creating a different way of being in relationship with each other. So breathe a sigh of relief. I'm not going to accuse you of having white privilege or being a white supremacist or a racist. Because when those terms and accusations are bandied about, they push the denial response and they become the topic of conversation. They become the debate. They become the focus. So instead, let's underthink things and use, for once, less reason and more interaction, which may be messier than reason because we actually have to bump shoulders together, but can also result in change. On Facebook and Twitter feeds, those types of discussions are highly inflammatory, and people quickly stake a claim to one side or the other, but they're rarely in dialogue with each other, and they rarely actually make a point beyond who's the most racist. These days, such discussions appear immediately after news of yet another death of a person of color at the hands of law enforcement. So what's the point of arguing over whether one group is guilty of those labels anyway? They only perpetuate the status quo and prevent and prohibit moving through it to a different way of being. As Reverend Andy said last week, may we be willing to doubt our own truths, end quote. Yes, may we be willing to suspend our disbelief. Our guest speaker, Joe Rubio of the Valley Interfaith Project, who shared the pulpit with Reverend Andy a couple of weeks ago, argued that reason can be used to rationalize or justify reactions. I think that's what we tend to do in our national discussions surrounding the division of race. Our current public debate over the Black Lives Matter movement may be an example of overthinking a concept. I found the debate about Black Lives Matter interesting. It turned almost immediately to all lives matter, and then simply to lives matter. Black Lives Matter banners have been vandalized all over the country where the word black is ripped off the banner. The concept, I think, becomes too threatening to consider, and instead, the debate about which lives matter has become the public dialogue, because the idea that Black Lives Matter was somehow translated to only Black Lives Matter or some such thing, and its message then was quickly subverted. So I'm not here to argue whether the Black Lives Matter movement is good or bad. My point is that the quick subversion of it seems evidence of a kind of denial, and further evidence that divisions along race lines are entrenched in our culture. Can you all see the cartoon? It says in the first frame, well, I think that all lives matter. And then in the second frame, we should care exactly equally at all times about everything. And then in the third frame, the water hose is extinguishing a non-existing flame in the house on the left. And the house on the right, which is engulfed in flames, burns to the ground. An article in the online blog called The Vox states that the point of Black Lives Matter isn't to suggest that Black lives should be or are more important than all other lives, but instead that Black lives are relatively undervalued in the US and more likely to be ended by police, and the country needs to recognize that inequity to bring an end to it, end quote. The cartoon illustrates the imbalance that is created when Black is removed from Black Lives Matter. Accusing people, often well-meaning people, of being a racist, white-privileged, white supremacist is off-putting and backs them into a corner where the only way out is denial. A better question is, how can we shore up the gap that divides us? Toward that end, how do we use reason to move beyond the divisive accusations and labels that keep the divisions firmly and that keep the divisions firmly in place and arguably conveniently in place? One way is to resist the temptation to react with an all-or-nothing response. An all-or-nothing response that changes Black Lives Matter to All Lives Matter or simply Lives Matter, instead of being able to hold the thought for consideration and create space for building equity in all aspects of our lives. A few weeks ago, 14-year-old Ahmed Mohammed brought his homemade alarm clock to school to show his teacher and was arrested and accused of making a fake bomb. President Obama reached out to him, and social media was quickly divided on the subject. Was it a bomb or not? My favorite response to the situation was a supposed conversation between two friends that was recreated on Facebook. So it's not the me in this eye. I said, "It's sad they thought that kid had a bomb." She said, "They didn't think he had a bomb." I said, "Yes, they thought he made a bomb and even called the police." She said, "They just wanted to humiliate a little Muslim African boy. They didn't think he had a bomb." I said, "Don't be a conspiracist. They might be a little prejudiced, but I'm sure they thought he had a bomb." She said, "Okay, but they didn't evacuate the school like you do when they have a bomb. They didn't call a bomb squad like you do when there's a bomb. They didn't get as far away from him as possible like you do when there's a bomb. Then they put him and the clock in an office, not like you do when there's a bomb. Then They waited with him for the police to arrive. Then they put the clock in the same car as the police. Then they took pictures of it. I said, wow, they never thought he had a bomb. The power of language and how we say what we say affects what we believe and helps rationalize the status quo. A recent article in the New York Times states, the very same event can be described in a variety of ways, each of which conveys subtly different information and affects what we come to believe. The way politicians, and get ready for that, describe events can shift our ascriptions to blame. Harry was hit by the round fired by the gun. And the way we describe actions to others and to ourselves can influence how unethical the actions seem. It was music sharing, not illegally downloading music, end quote. So with that in mind, let's ask, what is the Black Lives Matter movement? And this is from the blacklivesmatter.com guiding principles that you'll see on the screen. I encourage everyone to take a look at it. The text at the top states, Black Lives Matter is an ideological and political intervention in a world where Black lives are systematically and intentionally targeted for demise. It is an affirmation of Black folks' contributions to this society, our humanity, and our resilience in the face of deadly oppression. And then at the bottom of the page, it states, Black Lives Matter is an online forum intended to build connections between Black people and our allies to fight anti-Black racism, to spark dialogue among Black people, and to facilitate the types of connections necessary to encourage social action and engagement. Tough stuff. We could take a position to argue against the premise and find ways to make it wrong, and that is often the course of denial. That is also the path of maintaining the status quo. How can we instead be allies with the Black Lives Matter movement? I suggest the first thing to do is to be silent and resist the inclination to overthink and then overtalk the experience of Black voices about their lives. I challenge everyone to read Black authors and hear their stories. Read, for example, Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, without arguing against the experience he writes about growing up in Baltimore, even though he offers a powerful criticism. I quote from the book, "As slaves, we were this country's first windfall, the down payment on its freedom. After the ruin and liberation of the Civil War came redemption for the unrepentant South and reunion, and our bodies became this country's second mortgage. In the New Deal, we were their guest room, their finished basement. And today, with the sprawling prison system, which has turned the warehousing of Black bodies into a jobs program for dreamers and a lucrative investment for dreamers, today, when 8% of the world's prisoners are Black men, our bodies have refinanced the dream of being white. Black life is cheap, but in America, Black bodies are a natural resource of incomparable value." End quote. Accept the argument that race matters in all aspects of our culture and help determine access to benefits that can catapult a child to a higher place. A recent essay on National Public Radio explored educational programs for gifted students. They interviewed a father whose son was tested in kindergarten for the gifted and talented program, but didn't qualify. And this was a Latino father, by the way. The essay states that Houston's enrollment statistics indicate that Hispanic students like Isaac and African American students would more likely be identified as gifted if they were white or Asian. That's a trend across the country, end quote. An argument could be made that, oh, that's just in Houston, or it can also be a social, economic, class experience, etc. But what if we just accepted the statistics at face value? What if we just hear it and accept it with the awareness that what Ta-Nehisi Coates calls the dream begins at a very early age and pervades all our institutions? This awareness doesn't obfuscate the social economic class experience. We can hold both without denying one. Holding silence is not easy. And holding silence can become a way of giving us time to pause, a time for us to, instead of being in denial, to think about ways that we can do things differently. Think about ways that we can do things differently in the classroom. Think about ways that we can do things in our work environment, who we hire, who we promote, all kinds of things. And we can only do that when we're coming from a place of acceptance and working toward doing things differently. So I'd like to end with a clip from the Oscars performance of the song from the movie Selma, which our beloved Conversations group showed last week. It's by John Legend, who wrote the song, and Common, and a chorus of choir members. And I read in a couple of places that the white choir members aren't actually singing. Instead, they are present shoulder to shoulder with the black choir members, but they are silent and listening. They let the people of color do the talking, if you will, and they don't flinch or turn away. Now, I tried to formally fact-check this claim about the choir, but I really wasn't able to absolutely confirm that that's what happened. So whether that is true or not, I really like the illustration of what it can mean when we underthink our positions, and instead of going into denial and arguing against the status quo, that we simply just hold the space, that we simply move beyond our own denial and think instead about what happens if that's true. So the Oscars official version of the performance seems to no longer be available. It's been, so I wasn't able to find, so I really wasn't able to check everything and see. But I want to believe that what it said in a couple of online blogs, that it's true, that the white chorus members are there in support and strong solidarity of the black voices. And so in his acceptance speech, John Legend said, "Selma is now. The struggle for justice is now. The Voting Rights Act that they fought for 50 years ago is being compromised right now in this country today. Right now, the struggle for justice is real. We live in the most incarcerated country in the world. There are more black men under correctional control today than there were under slavery in 1850. When people march with our song, we want to tell you, we see you, we are with you, we love you. March on."